So tell us about the few of the men in the room, Continental Congress going on, Jefferson, Franklin, Washington. Who were these guys, and why did they get a seat at the table?
You know, it's really important for us to realize that there was something historians call a genius cluster going on at that time. At certain moments in history, World War II is another example, you have geniuses arising to the fore, and you have a cluster of them, and that's really what produces the history that we know about. And the Founding Fathers, as much as we might pick on them for slavery and other excesses, they were brilliant. So you have George Washington, a man who had fought for the British during the French and Indian War. He was wealthy. He was a plantation owner. He was deeply revered. He was a man of character. He had bad dentures and didn't speak a lot. That's one of those little sidelights of history. But he was honored as a man of character, a man of heft, a man of weight. He was known worldwide for some of the battles that happened in the French and Indian War. Then you've got Jefferson. He's sort of the poet historian. He's sort of the writer and the visionary, and he's a creative. If you've ever been to Monticello in Virginia, inventive man, develops new silverware, new kinds of cups, new kinds of book stands, new ways to.
So he's like the Steve Jobs of his time.
It's unbelievable how inventive he is. Even his bed is his own invention. It's crazy. Everybody needs to go to Monticello. So he's also, though, we wouldn't call it liberal necessarily, but he had been offended by the church. So he'd moved away from traditional religion. He was a little bit out of step. He was a little bit more enlightenment, some folks might have said. And that's going to be important when it comes down to the writing of the Declaration of Independence. And then you've got Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin is the big personality. He's the older man. He's the big gregarious guy, the big eater, the big drinker, the big talker. Unbelievably accomplished. He was a printer. He was a scientist. He was perhaps the most popular author, Poor Richard's Almanac. He had written in the colonies. Unbelievable. He was known worldwide for his scientific investigations and experiments. So he's going to be the guy who pulls them together. He's going to be the guy who, with his big personality and his big vision and his ability to put his arm around the guy and ask him to have a drink and talk things through, he's going to be sort of the spirit that lapses over all of it. But all of these men were brilliant. John Adams, Hamilton, we've heard so much about of late. All of them were brilliant. All of them were very unique. They were very different from each other. But together they formed this genius cluster that gave us our country.
Wow. That's impressive. And it sounds like they were very complementary in their different strengths and weaknesses and how they supported each other.
Well, like any team in any business anywhere, they drove each other crazy. Right? Very different, but needed
big personalities.
Needed each other.
Yeah.
You had Hamilton, who we all know now is this orphan from the Caribbean, who just drives Jefferson nuts, you know? And Jefferson drives Washington nuts. And Franklin drives them all nuts because he's so inventive and so creative and such the big personality and so loud. But they needed each other, and what the whole that they formed gave us what we have. We got to be grateful for all of it. And it should be encouraging, too, that no matter how weird and misfit we might be, we fit in a team in a way that makes us better than we are alone.
Yeah, great reminders that we need to be self-aware of our unique giftings and use them appropriately.
Yes.
Not as a weapon, but to support each other.
And also not be too apologetic or upset about the uniqueness of our past. I was raised as a military brat, for example, moved every year of our lives, lived mainly in Germany. At that time, if you talked to 18-year-old Stephen Mansfield, I would have been ticked off about it. I didn't have the typical American life. Now I'm thrilled for where I live, thrilled for the languages I learned, thrilled for the people that I know. My father danced with Princess Margaret of England in our living room. I mean, now that's a great thing. But earlier on, I would have resented it. So I have to be careful and realize that there's a weaving to our lives that's valuable, and that's what came together with our founding fathers.
Yeah, that background, those experiences, that context really shapes you and gives you such a unique perspective that you can use in business and leadership later on.
Well, and then, of course, the wise person, I think why this was most Washington, realizes that from his perspective, with his background, with his personality, he doesn't see the whole. He doesn't see the entire picture. So he knows he needs other people. And he also would write about the fact in his journals, and they irritate the heck out of me, but I need them. And that's a wise leader.
hurling 1700s insults at them.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, which I won't repeat.
That's
now.
another
We'll
episode.
move on.
We need that for sure.
Cussing in the 1800s, 1700s.
So you mentioned Jefferson was a prolific writer.
Yes.
So was he kind of at the head of the writing of the Declaration of Independence?
Yes, the writing of the Declaration had begun in June, prior to the adoption of it later, obviously, and what we now celebrate is the 4th of July. And he was the main one who wrote it. Now, what we've got to know, though, is, again, these different giftings of the Founding Fathers work so wonderfully. Jefferson wrote the initial draft, but Franklin and John Adams and others edited it, and thank God they did, because Jefferson had his biases. A lot of the religious language got added later. The Declaration of Independence, one eminent scholar said that America is the only country founded on a creed, and it's the Declaration of Independence. And it has about 7 or 8 statements about God. So almost all of those were added later. Jefferson would not have put those in. Not that he was secular, but he just was hesitant about public religion. And then Jefferson did some things in the Declaration that were odd. He blamed King George for slavery. Well, that may have been his own conscience dealing with him a little bit. I don't know why he would do that. King George had not put slavery in the colonies. The colonists had welcomed it themselves. So John Adams had that cut. And there were some other things that they had cut and some language that they smoothed. Some of the classic language that we now memorize was a combination. But we're grateful for Jefferson's draft. It's about 85, 90% of what we ended up with.
Wow. And I can't imagine the editing room there of everyone yelling at each other about why they need to keep their part or take this out or add this. Man, to be a fly on the wall.
As you know, my main fame, or so to speak, in the world, or I'm best known as an author. And I've written about 25 books. So I have been edited heavily by professional editors. And I can feel Thomas Jefferson at this moment. He was not happy about it. He was ticked off. So what you've got to do is you got to remove the author from the room where the editing is happening, or he's going to blow a gasket, and let the editors do their job. And that's what they did. They sent Jefferson away because it's painful to be edited, especially when you're just grieving every single word that's cut. And I've certainly felt that. And so they separated him from the process. But what they came up with was pretty powerful.
There's a powerful leadership lesson right there.
Yes.
If you're the CEO, you're leading the place, you got to get out of the way and let your team do what they're best at.
Exactly.
And not meddle with it.